A lot of times people think communication is pronunciation, like speaking clearly, or having a good PowerPoint presentation, or telling everything that they did all the way through all of their projects. But those are not communication. If you look at the word communication, it has the same root word as the word community, and those have the same root word as the word common.
Hi, Stephen. So thank you so much for being here today. First of all, can you please share with us a little bit about yourself and your career journey so far?
Sure. Thank you, V. It's good to talk to you. And I'm very glad that you've invited me to come and be a part of your group. So I am a member of the Society of Actuaries. I'm a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. I started my actuarial work in 2001. I started with an insurance company in Indianapolis, and I passed exams, and I had some rotations within that company. I worked in valuation, and so calculating some reserves. I worked in some forecasting roles where we were doing lots of asset adequacy analysis. I did some pricing where I got to be on the front end of the policy. I had lots of different roles within that organization, and after about 15 years, it was time to move on. There were some family issues that I needed to take a step back for a little bit. When I came back to the insurance industry, it was to a reinsurance company in St. Louis, which is where I am now. So I worked with them for a couple of years, again, doing insurance modeling and forecasting work. Since then, again, I've taken a couple of other steps. I moved off and I started my own freelance writing business. And then I transitioned that into one of my clients became a full-time employer where I was working for a software firm that provides software for actuaries. So I was able to blend a lot of my experience in the technical world with some of the things that I think we're talking about today in terms of communication and storytelling. And then most recently, I've transitioned back to, again, a little bit more actuarial role, and I'm working with an insurance company. Again, we're doing software testing and implementation of new systems. So I've had a varied career, and it's been a fairly rewarding one so far.
You definitely had a lot of different experiences, like in the actual world. And then, like, when you say that you started getting into copywriting, it's like very different from the quantitative profession, because even for myself, I know one of the painful is like writing report. And so like, how did you make the decision to decide to become an actuary and then getting into that copywriting area?
Sure. So I think one of the things that drew me to the actuarial profession was a lot of the learning that was involved. At the very early part of your career, you're taking some exams and you're learning basically a whole industry from scratch. Because at least for me, I wasn't an actuarial science major at university. I was physics major. And then after university, I taught mathematics for a couple of years for elementary students. So I didn't really have any idea of what actuaries did, but I liked that they did math. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go do math all day. That first 10 to 15 years was just a lot of learning about the industry and what goes on. One thing I noticed was that I've learned that I'm a very tangible person, and I like to see something at the end of the day that I've completed. So when we do an analysis and I make a new spreadsheet, hey, that's very satisfying to me. And when we do a quarterly analysis and we write a report, that was very satisfying to me. That creation process was. I got to the point, as I mentioned a little earlier, where I had some personal issues, and I didn't feel like I could devote a full-time concentration just with my brain and everything that was going on to an actuarial role for full time. And so I decided to step back a little bit, and I realized that that storytelling and that creation process is what those copywriters do. They help tell a story for whether it's an organization that needs to raise some funds, so they're going to make a direct appeal, or whether it's a small firm that's starting up and they need to tell their story on their website. I worked for lots of different organizations in some of those capacities, and helping them to tell their story is that tangible, it's that creative process that I like. I appreciate and I value very much actuarial work and the insurance industries. I'm a beneficiary of life insurance. I'm always going to have automobile insurance and all those different kinds of things. I understand those and I find them very valuable. I think that, again, the thing that is drawing me even now to doing some of my writing that I do on the side, or some of the projects that I do in the professional world, is that creative process when you can start with sort of a blank canvas and you have something at the end of the day that feels very, very real to me. And so that's why I like some of those projects.
You made a very few good points, is like in terms of like the creative process as well as like the storytelling aspect, because I do believe like the actuary of the future, we need to be able to develop more, become like more well-rounded, and become to be able to like not just crunch the number, but be able to tell what these numbers actually mean. And actually like for our work, a lot of them is like in terms of coming up with innovative thing, a creative solution, because the world is getting more and more complicated. So a lot of the problems that we're solving is like require a lot of thinking outside the box. So I can see the linkage there.
Yes, well, exactly. That's the thing that we've said before. Like the math has already been done, right? We already know how to calculate a reserve according to X formula. The question that the actuaries need to be able to answer is, if you calculate according to X formula, what different impacts does it have than if you calculate it according to Y formula? And that's really where the actuarial skill set is going to come in. It's to help use all the data that you have to inform a decision that your organization or your business or your individual person or whatever that individual underwriting needs to have in the future. And so you're right, we aren't just going to be number crunchers, and we shouldn't be just number crunchers, but we are, but we need to be able to take that next step and start to think of some of those creative and innovative solutions to the problems that are coming up.
So I guess, is that something that in the book that you wrote is not about the data? Like what is the book about?
Yeah, great question. So I had this same idea, a couple of years ago, where I recognized that a lot of the quantitative professionals, they spend a lot of time talking about data. Here's my data. I've got the right data. I've got the right algorithm. I've got the right thing. And they never actually get to, so what does it mean? As you said before, that's what we need to be focused on. And that's why we're having people do this, not machines, because machines could just push the data from one side to another and put it into some report. And that's why we build all these technologies, so that we can have people think about what are the implications of those data and of those reports. So I was thinking about this, and I thought about different ways that some of those quantitative professionals, and it's not just actuaries. I wrote this for actuaries and data scientists and engineers because they have very overlapping skill sets, right? They all think of things sort of in the same way, a lot of systems, a lot of numbers, a lot of data, a lot of, that kind of quantitative mindset. But again, they get very caught up in the things that they know, and they aren't very good very often at helping other people to understand what it means for them. So as I was thinking through that, I started coming up with a few different ways that other people might want to improve their communication. And as I wrote them down, I realized, this should be expanded a little bit. So I wrote a small ebook. It's about 40 pages or so. It's available on my website, or you can send me an email, and I'd be happy to send you a copy of that. It's called It's Not About the Data. And these are some communication strategies that people can use to help make their message a lot more clear. And in fact, I realized a slight flaw in this, only a few months ago, because I sort of fell into one of the assumptions that most of us quantitative professionals do. We assume that everybody knows what we know, so we just say the things that we know we mean, and we expect other people to know that, right? So we use a lot of jargon, we use a lot of insider language. That is even true with the idea of communication skills, because I think everybody has sort of their own view of what communication skills are and what good communication is. And I know that I did when I was writing that book. I did not include anything like, this is what communication is, but if you'll allow me a minute, I'll give you my definition of what communication is. A lot of times people think communication is pronunciation, like speaking clearly, or having a good PowerPoint presentation, or telling everything that they did all the way through all of their projects. But those are not communication. If you look at the word communication, it has the same root word as the word community, and those have the same root word as the word common. So my definition of communication is building shared understanding. So you know what I mean, and I know what you mean. A lot of what people think of as communication is really just broadcasting. And it's one side dumping everything on the other side and saying, here, get what you want, and I hope it works for you, but I'm not going to spend any more of my time helping you to understand. And I think that then causes problems for that other side. It slows down the process. It causes anxiety, and it causes misunderstandings. So if people can work better for that shared understanding, that community understanding, that common understanding, that's what I hope people will get out of reading something like It's Not About the Data.
That's actually make perfect sense, because it's all about being able to, I would say, transfer the knowledge in this case. Then when you be able to have a common understanding, it means that both parties have agreed on what will be the knowledge on the topic, on the message. Yeah.
And I have a very good example of that from my son last week. Went to his bowling practice, and he threw the ball and he missed whatever he was supposed to do, and his coach told him to kill it the next time. So in his mind, the phrase "to kill it" means to go really hard, because that's kind of what we were associated with. So he tried really hard. He threw the ball even harder, and it still didn't do what he wanted to do. And his coach said, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Well, you told me to kill it." she said, well, to kill it means to kill the spin. She wanted him to stop the spin on the ball and throw at the same speed. So she had a word that meant something to her. He had the same word, but it meant something different. So there was a miscommunication there. And that's a lot of times what happens when, specifically us quantitative people, talk to the non-quants and we say the things that we think everybody knows, but it just goes over their head, or they just don't, or they take it and they have their own interpretation and they go off and they do something else. And it's next week in the next project update. Why did you do that? Because you said this. Guess what? I meant this. You meant that. And now you're in that cycle. So, communication is not just the right words. It's also making sure that both sides have the same understanding.
Yeah, definitely. So with this, can you share with us like maybe 3 main tips from your book?
Sure. This book is, it's got 12 different strategies that I've laid out, and I've laid them out as both input strategies and output strategies. And I do want it to be, I do make it clear that there are techniques that some people need to do to get the right information in, and there are things that they can do to present the right message when they get out. So 3 tips. I'm going to give you one of the input strategies. I say just ask a lot of questions, and especially the question, why? Why would you want to do that? What's that going to do for you? How is that going to help you? What do you need that for? Are you really sure that that's what's going to go on? What do you do after that? How does that make your life better? How do we need this kind of thing? A lot of times people hear a request for, some little thing. I want you to get that number that you got me last month. Great. I'll go get that number that I got you last month. They go off and they get the number and they bring it back. But that's not really what that person wanted. That might have been what they asked for, but that's not what they wanted. So asking many more questions will help to understand, do you need that number? No, I put that in that other thing. Well, why did you do that? Well, because that goes to the other report. Why did you do that? Well, because that report goes to the CEO. Well, I have a thing that the CEO would be able to use, and it's already ready. So let's give you a different thing. So asking a lot of those questions gets you the right information so that you can give the right information back. So that's the first tip, is to ask a lot of questions. A second one that is probably going to be difficult for many actuaries to understand is to be more accurate by being less precise. And a lot of you're kind of smirking because you understand that actuaries have this very big tendency to be very, very precise, but they're missing the fact that they're aiming in the wrong direction. They're not accurate very well. One old chief actuary that was at the company that I started with said you get 2 significant digits of precision. So if you're talking about something that's $31 million, you get the 3 and the 1. That's 31 million. That's where you have to stop, because that's all the more precise that you need to be. If you're talking about something that's 15,000, you don't need to talk about $15,647.32. The 1 and the 5 is precise enough, because now you're going to be spending your time on the right things. Is it 15 now and it was 18 last month and it was 21 the month before, and that's the problem? And if you get into, well, it was $647 versus $332, you're solving the wrong problem because you're aiming for precision that doesn't really help you with accuracy. So I know that a lot of actuaries, we like our accuracy, right? We like things with it that match down to the dollar, down to the penny. It's going to have to be a little uncomfortable sometimes when people are going to have to try to move forward and talk about things on the right order of magnitude. So be more accurate by being less precise is the second one that I have. The third one that I have is I recommend people to be clear about it. So again, we'll go back to that example. Somebody asked for, the number that you gave me on the report. Well, here's the number that you gave me. Now what? So to be clear is I want people to be more forthcoming with their questions about what do we do next? Or how would you like me to do this? Or what do you want me to do after this? So a lot of times a request comes in or a question comes, what is the X thing, right? And so we answer, well, it's that thing. We just tell them what it is, and then we leave it. There may be some assumptions on the other side that you told me we could do this. A good example, could we put that in the model next month? Yes, we could be the answer. Well, if there's no follow-up on, do you want me to put that in the model? There could be some difference of assumptions of what's going to happen next time. So that admonition, that recommendation to be clear about it is just to make sure that everybody understands what's happening next and how people should go about the next steps. So those are the 3 things, 3 little tips. So ask a lot of questions, be more accurate by being less precise, be clear about it. And so there's a bunch of others in that little ebook too.
Yeah, very interesting. And I like the part about the next step because at the end of the day, it's like when you go to a meeting or when you do something and you want to be able to determine what the next step, who are responsible for it, what action should we take next, so to in order to accomplish certain things. So it just leads to more and more output and everything. Yeah, so important that people need to be understanding and clear on what and who do what. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever see that in your career, in your experience, where there's a lot of again, you have a meeting and then there's nothing at the end of the meeting because everybody had some assumptions about, well, I thought you were going to do this and I thought somebody else was going to do that, but there's no clarity, there's no clear statement, and there's no recording of that. It goes into project management, it goes into good documentation, all of those aspects. Have you seen that in your own experience?
Yeah, for sure. Like absolutely. And I think that's also make it sometimes people get a little bit frustrated of having a lot of meetings because then when you don't have a clear course of actions or clear takeaways and nobody take that initiative to do that, you're like, oh, why was I even in this meeting? Was it even useful and stuff? And especially in like these days when we have online meetings and it's easy to like just like, oh, invite someone in because it's so convenient now. So I think these kind of practice or tips that can help improve like just in terms of work performance and process overall for sure.
Right. And I do consider this a communication skill. It's partly project management, it's partly discipline, and it's partly just being a good, professional. But there is certainly a communication aspect to it. So that's why I put it in this book, and why I would encourage anybody to be mindful about that as they are looking for ways for themselves to improve in the future.
Yeah, totally agree. So any final advice for quantitative professionals to develop their communication skill?
Yes, it's going to be pretty simple. That anybody's going to tell you, if you want to get anything and make it better, you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to get some feedback from other people, and you're going to have to take some risks at times. So you're going to have the practice is not just standing in front of your bathroom at home and I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me, and talking to yourself. You actually have to take a risk, get up in front of a group. Maybe it's volunteer for the quarterly meeting in front of a couple of hundred people and say, hey, can I present that next time? To practice that and to ask for that feedback because we don't really improve without feedback. If you think that you're doing well, but you're not, then you're not doing well, and you're not going to know what you need to improve in the future. So you're going to have to take some risks. You're going to have to practice. You're going to actually solicit and ask for that feedback so that you can improve, whether it's communication skills or other skills that you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I would say actually for myself, like I try to like practice, even like for this channel is in a way for me to practice my communication skills. But I would say the second part feedback, sometimes I'm shy about that because like, oh, I don't want to hear bad comments and reaction and stuff. But I know there are different platforms that can provide very safe feedback. Like if you're part of like a Toastmaster club and those kind of organizations, so you feel like you're going to get more like a safe and structured comments and in a more positive way.
Yeah, and one of the things that that Toastmasters group will do, and in fact, actually, one of the things that I get a lot of feedback when I write items, for whether it's for a client or for my own writing, is to remember to separate the feedback and the presentation from the person. And it's kind of hard sometimes to do when somebody says you weren't being clear in that point, or you were all over the place with this. It's very easy for us as people to say, well, that means I'm a bad person, or I'm not good enough. And that's not what that feedback is saying. And so you're right that fear of maybe somebody's going to tell me something bad, if you view it as they're criticizing me, then you're not going to seek out that feedback. So that's a thing that I've written about before a couple of times in different places, where you have to separate the work from the person so that the work can be criticized. And it's okay for the person to hear that criticism and that feedback and then make the improvements next time to make the work better, because the person is still worthy and valid, regardless of whether or not the work is up to the quality that you expect it to be.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. Thanks again for being here today and share on your tips and experiences. And then, talking about the book. I would love to be able to read it and improve my communication skill further.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Dee. That was great stuff.